What kind of questions? Actually, this is a good use case. One of the things that David put together is what happens if it doesn't have an answer. David, can you walk us through kind of how, not every question is going to have a good quality answer. How do we go through that logic?
Yeah, so not every question that are going to ask an AI agent is going to have a great answer, partially because it's limited. One of the benefits of a RAG agent like we're using here, one of the benefits of Dust is that it's limited in scope, so that it's not going to give you false answers a lot of the time, but it's also not going to have this huge, it's not going to give you like things that aren't true. But it's also for that same reason, it's not going to have the answer to everything. So one thing I've incorporated into this is I've given it a glossary of our contact space at Hive to say, okay, if I have questions about this problem, or if it just simply can't come up with an answer, it will actually direct you to the person that best solves that problem. So, for example, I typed in here, imagine it's my first day. I have no idea about anything to handle. And I say, I have a question about benefits. Who do I ask? And it will point you to specific people within the company with emails and where to go view it. So just go view it in JustWorks. Go to SharePoint and view this exact page. It can really be a tool, especially for new hires, that can get you up to speed really quickly or direct you to the right person. I mean, I've actually gone to the point in Ask Hive where I've given it a layout of our office and said, how can I get from JP's office to the cafeteria? And it will tell you how to get there. I've really dummy proofed it. And so it makes it a really good tool, but not only for new hires. If I have a question, a kind of a niche question about payments, it'll do its best to answer that question. But even if it can't answer that question, it'll point me to the right person who can answer that question for me, which is a really powerful tool.
All right. What questions do you guys have there? All right, David, you can go ahead and unmute.
Okay, great. So my question's around, so we have similar applications where I want to look at Confluence, I want to look at HR repositories. I found it to be very effective. Where I've come across a personal stumbling block is hooking it into something like HubSpot. So now there's a bunch of data, right?
Yep.
And fact check even, so it consistently has failed, even 5 has failed when I say, like, give me all of my active opportunities by this market, for example. And so I just wonder if you have any best practices, is it not chat, and it should be Claude does better or Gemini does better, or it's like, how about a more data intensive kind of multifactorial problem?
Yeah, David, go ahead and pull up, edit that agent. So the big thing is it's the structuring of data. And actually, David had to go through this learning process too. So if you go into the, they must have relayed it out, the settings area. So there's the data sources. Yeah, you go ahead and click that. So one thing on Dust, on the connected data that we haven't clicked here and added in is like SQL or very, very large data sets, which it can work on. So David, can you walk through the different types of searches and what works better when and how to manage if you've got an incredible amount of data that like David was talking about, what is the best structure versus if you've got a book and it's a structured PDF versus a lot of different types of data sets, because you went through that process as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had this exact same problem where I was feeding these huge audio transcripts, sometimes multiple hours long, hundreds of thousands of characters, different speakers through, and it was really having trouble finding stuff within that big bulk and being able to find stuff. So I've pulled up this little configure. I've added, so let's say I'm adding some Confluence data, which I've already added in, but just for an example's sake. And I have these different processing methods. Now, I actually really like how they've changed this for search to be the primary option, because before it was include data. And all of these have different kind of roles and purposes, and they're all really good at different things. So I'd say, so the most baseline one is search content. Now, this is just going to be your semantic search tool. If I type in what's the dress code at Hive, it will search all of the documentation for the words dress code or dress or clothes and find the information around that and spit it back out to me. But that's only one tool. So for these huge types of, you have one of 4 tools. So let's start with include data. Include data is different from search in that it's time bound. So it's going to go, like if you have a website, for example, that gets updated every so often, Include Data is a great tool. It's not a lot of content. Include Data can't handle a ton of content, but it is great at keeping things up to date. So if I have like a company glossary page where it's, like people who are at the company are constantly changing, it can read the most recent version of that website, take the information out of it, and tell you on a time-bound kind of basis what the information is on that site. We got query tables. Again, like if this is like if this is quantitative data, so stuff like, spreadsheets of financial metrics, other things like that, query table is going to be your best option. I mean, it really is. The output is kind of like an Excel, and I haven't used this one too much, but it is like an Excel sheet, the output, and it's great for numbers. And then finally, you have extract data, which it sounds like this for the question might be the best, because this will go through huge amounts of data, and you can actually give it. So if I put extract data, you can actually give it a schema, so like a little JSON instructions within like the search tool or the processing method that will tell it how to find stuff within these big sources and give it to you in a digestible manner. So I would say extract data is really the best for these big tools. Like, for example, one of the agents I have is, like I was saying, and also, sorry, don't be afraid to double dip on some of these things. Like, you can have a search and an extract processing method running on the same data source. So if you have like this new contract screener, I mean, some of this stuff in here is huge. It's, we've got these large legal JSONs, which are the sources. I mean, you got the entirety of the equal credit opportunity. You got like tons of this stuff that's hundreds of pages of dense legal documents. And that's really hard to sort through for anybody, even a computer. So I just say I've gone
for those for like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, like that functionality, that extract data functionality. There's a proxy for that, or is that very specific to Dust?
There isn't.
Yeah.
So they have what's called MCP, and we'll get to that in the next slide. But it is all up to that company and how it's processing. We're not going to go into coding. We'll see if we have time for vibe coding. But the way that the APIs are structured with the data, that is why I do not like using an LLM directly for a large data set, especially unstructured data that is a lot of information. It does a very, very poor job. There's this word context window. The biggest context window is Gemini. It's 2 million tokens, which is, I mean, not quite an encyclopedia, but it's probably every book on my shelf. But that's it. And that's not going to solve your problem. If you want to access, say, a SQL database, or like you said, a HubSpot, or you got a CRM, or you got like thousands or millions of rows of data, that is not going to work at all. Either your dev, quote unquote, tech team or consultants are going to have to build that architecture, or, honestly, this is going to do 99% of the job, and it's production ready. What I mean production ready is, and I think I mentioned it last time, we have about 120,000 people applying for a loan on our tech platform a day. Well, it needs to be able to have the AI agent process, take the input, and create an output in a matter of seconds to milliseconds, right? You do not want it to be waiting any period of time to be able to go through that. All right, we'll keep going. Jose, good to see you. What's your question?
Hey, JP. Just a quick one in terms of basic access for the team. So we have our individual accounts in our teams, but how do we provide access to all of them securely to this one? Is that an enterprise account, or is that separate?
One of the great things I like about Dust is you do one domain authentication. It's literally, if you're familiar with like, whether it's GoDaddy or whatever your provider is, you literally add in one line, it's a CNAME, and then everybody in your entire company at your domain can log in and set it up instantaneously. Good and bad. That means every monkey in the office who signs up, you're paying for. So just make sure you're managing all the licenses, but it does do a good job of authenticating company domain and is one and done. I literally had an employee literally say, "Hey, JP, can you get me set up?" I was like, you don't need me. You can automatically set yourself up as long as you're using the company email address. Now, David, one of the things you didn't show that I'm going to actually share my screen. which is an agent of agents. Now, this doesn't mean that it's a lot more complicated. It can take a little bit more time. Let me pull up my screen here. All right, so I have, I manage money, my own money, like many of you do, or you have a wealth manager, whatever. And I think we talked about, I have a whole bunch of investment gurus that I kind of follow. So on the venture capital side, there's like Ben Graham, Ben Horowitz, Brad Feld, what's another good? Jeffrey Moore on technology, Howard Marks on real estate. There's a Ben Graham one that I created for Warren Buffett. So there's all these different agents. One of the things that I've done, so for Howard Marks, let me see. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Howard Marks. Howard Marks, very famous author and investor in real estate. He writes a lot of really good papers. I did not create this AI agent. One of our employees who's based in Nepal, Sunita, I don't know if she's on the call, she has, again, zero background in building AI anything. She's been working with the company for, I think, like a month. And I said, just go on there, download everything about Howard Marks that you can find. So what she did in the spaces, she just went to the folder. We created a Howard Marks folder, and she just took every single article and every single writing that Howard Marks had done that she could find on the website, and just literally uploaded it into the folder. Now, again, you could do it several ways. You could upload it in the folder here. You could put it through an MCP connection to Notion or different types of connection from that standpoint, but she did it that way. And then let me go back to Howard Marks here. And then she created a description. Now, this could actually, you could now that they've got the prompt optimizer, you could actually copy and paste this and see if we can optimize it more. What's cool is it'll actually give you hints on how to improve the instructions as well. So say you're like not an expert like everybody here and myself. It says, could you specify what types of questions or topics that this assistant should focus on? So you can literally take that and add more context. I know David had used this, and I use this all the time because, like, you don't think about all the ideas of how to best improve it. So there's a great tip guide there. We use an extract data, and then we connected it to all the information on Howard Marks right there. Okay, so I created Howard Marks, and say, for instance, I want to evaluate a deal. Well, let me look actually from a VC standpoint. Let me find my VC manager. VC. So on my VC manager, what I did, so we created that. I created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other AI agents to query this master VC agent. So what happens is, I don't know about you, but every friend and family member in connection sends me some tech VC deal every 5 minutes, it feels like. So I get this never-ending inbound of emails. So I literally just forward the email over to Sunita, and she's going to run this VC manager on the deal. And it's going to include the data from VC books that we've uploaded and all these AI agents from all their perspective. So let's just see. Let's just create, this is on the fly. Let's see, should I invest in OpenAI if it goes public? Now, it might take a little bit of time, but what it's going to do is when it's thinking, instead of just relying on one single AI agent, it's going to query all of the agents in separate reasoning. So you guys have heard of these reasoning models, and it takes like forever to go through it. Well, this is like, I think, so much better because it's going to take these AI agents that you've created from all these different perspectives. It'll break it down, it'll walk you through it, and then it'll give you like a synopsis of it. For those of you who are in my Stanford class this last year, I would get all the audio recordings of all my professors, and I would take all their writings and citations of information, and I would create an AI agent for each one of them. And that's really what inspired me to find Dust.tt, because I created my own tool, and I was like, wow, Dust kind of does it. So should I invest? It goes through, it gave it a score. That's another thing that I like to do. When I create an AI agent, I like to get it to score, whether it's a percentage or some kind of scale, because the problem is if you don't give it scores, it's just going to come up with stuff, right? It's going to be a little bit qualitative, which is fine. But if you give it a scoring methodology like we all do, if you've ever invested in anything, whether you know it or not, in your brain, you've gone through a process, right? What you're trying to do is extract from your brain that step-by-step process you did as best as you can. I've met several wealth managers in the office and traders and stuff like that where they're like, I've got a process of how I evaluate or go through a filtering process on a deal or a new stock or a new IPO or a new company. Well, you can systematically go through that process. And that's what I did is I created my own score. So I had different weights, market opportunity, team quality, et cetera, and gave it that, give the analysis, all the concerns, investment thesis, and it gives me a pretty good understanding. Now, one of the other ones that I do in my investment process is I give an evaluation. If you know Aswat Damarajan, I can't remember his exact pronunciation. He's the NYU very famous professor on valuations. So I literally extracted all of his information, created a valuation expert. I said, what should the value of OpenAI be? So whenever I'm looking at a deal, now I've done a lot of deals. What did David say before? And I said last month, this is a high school intern. This is not Aswat, right? So if you don't know what you're talking about and you assume that the AI is correct, you're going to get into trouble, right? Yes, I think it can, like ChatGPT 5 Pro with deep research, can probably do maybe 70 to 80% of what a doctor can do. I'm not saying it's at 100%. It's getting actually in certain areas at very close to, if not better than. But still, I'm not a doctor, and I should not rely on ChatGPT 5 Pro, even though I've spent all this money on it to rely on it as a doctor. But I've got, you probably have a primary care physician. Maybe you had a physical therapist. Maybe you had a bunch of MRIs, whatever it is. The thing is, when you start having too many providers, you keep hearing all this conflicting information. So what I do is I literally take all the data, all my blood work, all this information, pull it in, and I can analyze it. And then what do? I send it out to all my doctors and say, hey, what is your thoughts on this game plan? And guess what? Magically, they all are like, oh yeah, that's a good game plan. Well, guess what? I do the same thing with investing. Why? Because the AI agent that I've trained now would go through that process more specifically with RAG. Oh, in the chat, I defined what RAG is, which is retrieval augmented generation. The point is you don't want it to hallucinate, but you want it to have good context. So one of the things that if you have a lot of good quality information in your company, that is a perfect setup for a RAG. And then you create your own workflow. Now, we're not going to talk about workflows today unless we get some extra time. But this kind of gives you the process. This is Aswat's approach for doing evaluation. Short answer, $50 to $60 billion. Bull case near 150 billion. That seems like a pretty high range from 50 to 150. But the point is, at least you have something to bounce ideas off of when you're making the decision process. It's a lot more intelligent. Now, here's the reality. There was this very famous study that came out in MIT where they said people who are using LLMs, their brain function is collapsing. Basically, you're becoming dumber the more LLMs that you use. And the reason why is because you're not using it for brainstorming and learning. You're using it to outsource your brain decision making. And that's the danger of this process, right? We have seen more often than not when a person literally had a QA quality, QA engineer in the company. He's got 20 years of experience, 25, maybe even 30 years of experience. Incredible. He's got a lot of experience. Well, he used an LLM to build out some test cases for QA. And he said, wow, he did an incredible job. And then he tried it for something else and did a terrible job. And I used this example last time. Well, I said, do you have expertise in the thing that did a terrible job? He said, absolutely not. I said, do you have expertise in the thing that you did a really good job at? He said, absolutely. Well, when you know what you're talking about, the tool becomes additive. If you have no clue what you're talking about, you're hoping that you know what you're talking about in the process. All right, so I'm going to pause there. What questions? There's a lot of information we went through. Agent of agents, MCP. We'll go into that a little bit more detail from that standpoint. But what questions does anybody have? I know there's a lot of information there.